In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint this quick and easy snowy scene in gouache. I love working with a limited palette with gouache, and for this snowy little scene we're just going to use black, ultramarine and titanium white, but any tube of blue that you've got will work for this. To start off with, we're going to paint the background. Use a wide flat brush for this and paint the background a dark blue colour. This is going to be roughly half of the background, and as you get towards the bottom of this area you can add a little bit of white. It'll give it a nice hazy glow just above the horizon. For this snowy ground we're just going to use white gouache, but this is going to mix on the page with the blue that's already there, and we're going to get a really nice variety of blues and pale blues to indicate the snow. For these first brush strokes, for the snow in the distance, we can just add a little white to our brush and allow it to mix with the blue that's still there. For this we're still using the flat brush, and we can kind of create overlapping sweeping strokes that suggest the fall of the land. As you work your way down the page, add a little more white to your brush, and at some point you'll need to clean your brush off pretty good to get most of the blue out of it. That way, for the snow in the foreground, we can keep it quite white. As you run out of paint on your brush and reload it with more white paint, use this fresh paint to pick out the shapes of the waves in the ground. Keep adding white and blend it all together until you've added paint to the whole page. Let this background dry before we move on to add some trees. So we're going to add 2 layers of trees on this. We're going to add darker trees with more details in the foreground, and in the distance we're going to add some lighter trees where we can't see all the shadows and the details of the branches. I always like to start trees by adding in the main trunk first. This gives me an idea of where the trees are going to be placed in the painting and how tall they are in relation to each other. This helps me get a nice balance before I spend time adding the branches and the details. For this I'm using a really dark blue, and this is a size 4 flat shader brush from Kingart, and this was the perfect size for these trees. So once we've added the main trunks, we can go ahead and add the basic shape of the trees. For this, I'm using the same brush and the same dark blue colour. I really want to capture the layering of the branches, so I'm using the brush to create separate pointy shapes along the outer edges of the tree. And by turning the brush slightly as I do this, it creates these nice little flicks at the tips of the branches. Do this for all of your foreground trees. Now we can do the same for the trees in the background, and for this I'm using a pale blue grey. Arrange these smaller trees in a few clusters on the distant horizon, and use the same sweeping technique to create the silhouettes. These don't have to be as detailed because they're in the distance, you don't see as much information, but just as long as we're getting this basic shape. Once everything's dry, we're ready to add the details to these darker trees in the foreground, and for this we're going to use a pale blue colour. Select a small round or liner brush and begin to add the pale blue in small clumps to indicate the snow on the branches. Towards the top of the tree, these clumps should be smaller and get larger as you move down. We want this snow to communicate the shape of the branches and how they swoop down and away from the trunk, So add the pale blue in layers, allowing the dark behind to peep through and separate these marks. To give the impression that these trees are being illuminated by a bright full moon, we're going to add a highlight down the right hand side of the trees. Use your small brush for this and add some pure white down the right hand side over your blue marks. Once you've added your bright white highlight to the right hand side, you can add a shadow being cast off to the left side. Use a pale blue again for this, and start around the base of your tree and sweep away to the left. Repeat this process for the other trees in the foreground, using your pale blue to paint the snow on the trees and then highlighting down the right hand side with some white. And finally adding a pale blue shadow from the base of the tree off to the left. For the trees in the distance, we can add a blue just a little bit darker than the snow there to add an indication of a shadow off to the left of these two. Make sure your shadows are the same shape as your trees, so they're going to be wider around the base of the trees and extend out to a point at the very tip. And then use just a little bit of white down the right hand side of these trees to indicate where the light is shining. Finally, we can finish off this clear night sky with a sprinkle of stars. Give your starry sky some depth by adding stars of different sizes and space them out unevenly across the sky.